Here's where most men completely get it wrong. They think attraction is built by stacking compliments, agreeing more, being easier, being smoother. But what actually creates that spark, that pull, is contrast, emotional contrast. And older men understand this on a level most guys don't even realize exists. See, when you agree with everything a woman says, when you constantly validate her, laugh at every joke, nod along to every opinion, you think you're building connection, but what you're really doing is flattening the entire interaction. There's no tension, no edge, nothing for her to emotionally react to. It becomes predictable, safe in the wrong way. And predictable energy doesn't create attraction, it kills curiosity. Older men don't fall into that trap. They're not disagreeable for the sake of it, but they're also not afraid to not agree. And that's where the shift happens. Instead of saying, "Yeah, I totally get that," to everything, they might pause, smirk slightly, and say something like, I don't know if I buy that. Not in a confrontational way, but in a way that invites a reaction. It makes her lean in, defend her point, engage a little deeper. And suddenly, the conversation has life, because now there's polarity. There's a subtle push and pull. And that dynamic is what creates emotional movement. Think about it: when someone lightly challenges you, it activates something. You become more present, more invested. You start paying attention to how they think, not just what they're saying. And that's exactly the space where attraction starts to grow. Older men know this instinctively. They're not trying to impress, they're interacting. And here's the key part: it's playful, not defensive. That's where most guys mess it up. They hear "challenge her," and suddenly they become argumentative, rigid, or try too hard to be dominant. That's not it. That kills the vibe instantly. The energy has to stay light. There's a smile behind it, a relaxed tone almost, like you're enjoying the backhand fourth rather than trying to win it. It's the difference between saying, "You're wrong," and saying, "I don't think you'd survive 5 minutes doing it my way." Same idea, but one creates tension in a good way, the other creates resistance. And when you do this right, something interesting happens. She starts qualifying herself to you. She explains more, invests more, reveals more. Not because you ask, but because your presence created that space. That's the power of emotional contrast. You're not chasing the conversation, you're shaping it. Older men also know when to pull back. They don't overuse this. If everything is a challenge, it loses its impact. But when it's used sparingly, at the right moment, it hits differently. It breaks patterns. It keeps things unpredictable. And unpredictability, when it's grounded and controlled, is incredibly attractive. Because now she can't just categorize you as nice guy or easy to read. There's depth. There's nuance. There's something to figure out, and people are naturally drawn to what they can't fully predict. At the core of it, this isn't about lines or tricks. It's about having your own perspective and not being afraid to express it, even if it creates a little friction. That friction, when delivered with calm confidence, becomes the spark that most men are missing. And once you understand that, you stop trying to be liked and start becoming interesting. Now, this is where the dynamic really flips, and most men aren't even aware it's happening. Because the moment your words start implying standards, everything changes. You're no longer the one trying to prove your worth, you become the one quietly evaluating hers. And that shift alone is enough to completely alter how a woman perceives you. See, a lot of men walk into interactions already assuming the role of the one who needs to impress. You can hear it in how they talk, how they respond, how quickly they try to agree or compliment. There's this underlying energy of, "I hope she likes me." And the problem with that is it puts all the power on one side. She becomes the judge, and you become the one being judged. That's not an attractive position to be in. Older men don't operate like that. Not because they're trying to play games, but because they genuinely see themselves as valuable. So their words naturally reflect that. There's an unspoken message behind how they communicate. "I'm here to enjoy this, but I'm also paying attention to who you are." And when that message comes through, it creates a completely different kind of tension, one where she starts wondering how she's being perceived. And this doesn't come from saying anything arrogant or over the top. In fact, it's usually subtle. It's in the way they respond when she says something. Instead of instantly validating it, they might take a second, tilt their head slightly, and say, "That's interesting. I'm not sure I agree yet." Or they might playfully question something she says in a way that suggests curiosity, not approval. It's light, but it carries weight. Because now, instead of you trying to win her over, she's slightly leaning in, trying to understand where she stands with you. And here's where it gets powerful. When a woman feels like she has to earn your full approval, even just a little bit, her investment goes up. She starts sharing more, explaining more, showing different sides of herself. Not because you demanded it, but because your presence created that space. That's what standards do. They invite effort. But this only works if it's real. If you try to fake standards without actually having them, it comes off as forced, even insecure. Women are incredibly good at picking up on that. The energy has to match the words. You have to genuinely believe that not everyone is a match for you and be okay with that. Older men have lived enough life to understand this. They've seen what works for them and what doesn't. So when they speak, there's a grounded certainty behind it. They're not afraid of losing someone over being themselves because they're not operating from scarcity. And that's exactly why their words feel different. They also don't rush to impress. They take their time. They let things unfold. There's patience in how they communicate, and that patience signals confidence. It tells her, without saying it directly, I'm not in a hurry. I'm not trying to lock this down. I'm just seeing where this goes. And that relaxed approach makes everything feel more natural, more intriguing. And again, this isn't about putting someone down or acting superior. That's where people misunderstand this completely. It's not about making her feel like she's not good enough. It's about showing that you also have a filter, that your attention, your interest, your energy, those things are earned, not given away freely. Because the moment your words start reflecting that mindset, even subtly, the entire interaction shifts. You're no longer chasing validation, you're creating value through presence. And that's when attraction stops being something you try to get and becomes something she starts to feel. Now, this is the part that looks simple on the surface, but it's actually where most of the power is coming from. Because it's not just what you say, it's how clean, how direct, and how intentional your words are. Older men don't try to impress with complexity. They don't over-explain, they don't fill every silence, and they definitely don't talk just to keep the conversation alive. They understand that the fewer words you use, the more each one matters. And that's something a lot of men struggle with. There's this urge to keep talking, to keep adding, to keep proving. You'll see it all the time. Someone asks a simple question, and instead of answering it directly, he goes into a long explanation, adds extra details, tries to sound interesting, tries to make sure he's understood. But what that actually communicates is uncertainty. It feels like he's trying to convince, rather than just express. Older men move differently. When they speak, it's measured. If a question is simple, the answer is simple. If a statement can be made in one sentence, they don't stretch it into 5. And because of that restraint, their words land harder. There's no fluff to dilute the message. It's clean, it's grounded, and it feels intentional. Think about the difference between someone saying, well, I guess I kind of like that place. I mean, it's not bad. I've been there a few times. It's okay. Versus someone who just says, yeah, I like it. It's got a good vibe. Same idea, but one feels scattered. The other feels certain. And certainty is what people respond to. But here's where it goes. Deeper, it's not just about being brief. It's about being comfortable with silence. Older men don't rush to fill every gap in conversation. They let moments breathe. They're okay with a pause. And that pause actually creates tension in a good way. It gives space for anticipation, for curiosity, for the other person to lean in a little more. Because when you're constantly talking, there's no room for that. You're doing all the work. But when you pull back just slightly, when you allow silence to exist without panicking, it shifts the dynamic. Now she starts contributing more. She starts asking questions, sharing more, trying to keep the interaction going. And suddenly, the energy becomes mutual instead of one-sided. This also ties into emotional control. When you're calm enough to not overtalk, it shows that you're not seeking validation in the moment. You're not trying to fill space just to avoid discomfort. You're grounded, you're present, and that kind of presence is rare. Older men have learned that they don't need to perform to be interesting. They don't need to impress with words. They trust that who they are will come through naturally, without forcing it. And that trust shows up in how they communicate slow, deliberate, and without urgency. And here's the interesting part: when your words are simple and controlled, people start paying more attention to them. Because there's no noise around them, no extra filler, just clarity. And clarity feels strong. So instead of trying to say more, the real shift is learning to say less but mean it more. Let your words carry weight. not volume. Let them land without rushing to explain or justify. Because when you master that kind of simplicity, even the smallest things you say start to feel different. And that's when your presence does more talking than your words ever could. And this is where everything either comes together or completely falls apart. Because you can say the right words, you can understand the dynamics, you can even hold back and keep things simple, but if your emotional delivery isn't controlled, none of it lands the way it should. Older men understand that attraction isn't just built through language, it's built through energy, the feeling behind the words. And that's why they don't rush, they don't react impulsively, and they definitely don't let small moments throw them off. Their emotional state stays steady, regardless of what's happening in the interaction. Most men, on the other hand, are constantly reacting. If she takes a little longer to reply, their tone shifts. If she says something unexpected, they get slightly nervous. If there's a pause, they rush to fill it. And all of that creates this subtle sense of instability. It feels like their mood and their confidence is dependent on her response. Older men don't give that away. There's a calmness in how they deliver even the simplest things. If they say something playful, it's said with a relaxed tone, not a forced one. If they challenge her, there's no tension behind it. If there's silence, they don't scramble to fix it. And that emotional consistency is what makes everything feel grounded. Because when your emotions are steady, your words feel more believable. There's no hidden urgency, no neediness underneath. It's just clean. And people pick up on that immediately, even if they can't explain why. Think about it. Have you ever talked to someone who seemed slightly on edge? Even if they were saying the right things, something felt off. Maybe they laughed a little too quickly or tried a little too hard to keep the vibe going. That's emotional leakage, and it weakens everything they say. Now compare that to someone who's completely at ease. Their tone doesn't spike, their pace doesn't rush, and they're not looking for constant feedback. When they speak, it feels natural. When they pause, it feels intentional. That kind of control creates a sense of safety and intrigue at the same time. Older men have learned how to regulate themselves in these moments. They don't take everything personally, they don't overanalyze every reaction, and they don't feel the need to constantly adjust based on her behavior. They stay in their own frame. And because of that, their presence feels stable, almost effortless. And here's the part most people overlook. It's not about being emotionless. It's about being in control of your emotions. You can still be playful, expressive, even slightly teasing. But it's all coming from a grounded place, not from a need to get a reaction. Because the moment your energy starts chasing a response, everything shifts. Your words lose weight, your tone becomes slightly anxious, and even if it's subtle, it changes how you're perceived. Older men don't chase reactions, they allow them. They say what they want to say, then they let it sit. They're not watching closely for approval, not waiting to see if it worked. And that detachment is powerful, because it shows confidence without needing to prove it. So when you combine that steady emotional delivery with everything else, the contrast, the standards, the simplicity, your words start to hit on a completely different level. Not because they're perfect, but because they're backed by a presence that feels real. And that's the difference between someone who's trying to create attraction and someone who naturally becomes it.